Hello, good people. My name is Janice, and welcome to Dignity. Today, we're going to focus on Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which refers to participation in government and the right to free elections. To illustrate this particular article, I invited Nicole Yearwood to join me. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So we met when I was on the community board, and Nicole was in the borough president's office, and she was our liaison. And Nicole has extensive experience in the area of civic involvement. How did you get involved in civic involvement?
Well, I guess my first foray into politics and government began when I was in college, actually, in the early 90s. At the time, I was a recipient of the tuition assistance program funds from the state of New York. And the governor at that time said that he was going to cut funding to the tuition assistance program, which impacted myself and a lot of students on campus who were receiving these funds. And that's when I really realized how politics and policy impacts your daily life. And I was thinking to myself, a lot of times we think we can go about our business and not concern ourselves with politics and government and elections. And then you realize actually what elected officials do, which is policy, actually can impact your daily existence. And so while you may not do it, on the level that I do it, which because it's my passion, you do need to pay attention. We all do.
So what did you do when your TAP funds were threatened?
A lot of us on campus, we organized students in the program that I was in and other students that were impacted, low income, students of color, those that just didn't have the funds and really counted on the tuition assistance program to go to school. We organized and took buses up to Albany, lobbied our state elected officials, and protested on the steps of the Capitol with a bunch of other students from around the state of New York.
And is that why you majored in political science?
That definitely was the impetus for me changing my major. Actually, when I first started, I was a computer science major, card-carrying member of NSBE. I was going to do computer science and programming and all this technical stuff. And then I was just like, no, I need, this is what I want to do. People need to understand how government impacts their daily life. We need to, because we don't think that it does. A lot of people walk around and they don't make the connections. And so I feel like, if we start to explain to people how it's all connected, they'll start to kind of get how they need to actually pay a little bit more attention and be involved.
And so what did you do after college?
After college, I went to grad school. I have my master's in public administration also, so that I could, do this type of work with some credentials, I would say. And, temped, and then got my first job doing teen pregnancy prevention research. And I did that for about a year, and then I actually landed at the borough president's office.
So you did liaison work with the borough president for quite a while. What did you learn in terms of how government and policy impacts the individual life?
Well, one of the powers, a lot of people say community boards are advisory, and yes, they are, but one of the pieces, I always talk about ULURP, which is the Uniform Land Use Review process, where the community board has a specific, role in that process of how land is used, which is very important, especially in a city like ours. Additionally, they approve liquor licenses. They make sure that, there's no establishments within 500 feet of a school or a church, and they impact businesses. And so really it's, they are probably the most grassroots level of involvement that one, who's just trying to find out what's happening in their community. It's like the first step, I say.
What would you tell people who feel they don't have time to be involved in the community?
Since the Flint water crisis, actually, I use that as an example of, like I said, like people think government is this thing over here, this thing out there, that they don't need to engage in. And with Flint, specifically, it was elected officials, appointed officials that made the decision to switch the water source. And so it's like the basic necessity of water. Like they say, people can live for weeks without food. You can't live days without water, and it's such just a basic need. Like everyone, we all need it, no matter where you come from, no matter where you live. And it's like those officials actually can go like your water. You know what I mean? Like they have a say over the water you drink. And it's like if we don't start to get it, even when it impacts something like someone's water, like these are the decisions that are happening all the time. So while I use Flint as one example because that's something that everyone has heard about, people are still paying attention. Most recently another appointed official was indicted. Those people were appointed by the governor of the state of Michigan. You know what I mean? So when you think, oh, I don't have to vote, it's the governor's race, and you're not paying attention to who your governor's going to be, this person has the power to impact the water you drink, the water you bathe in. Fela Kuti has a famous song about water. Mm-hmm. And it says, if you want to cook soup, the water you're going to use. Mm-hmm. And so it's really like just the thinking, like we have to realize it's your water. Like they can impact your water. And that's in every city. I mean, there's, places that are closer to us in Jersey that are having water issues. So we really got to think about that. We really can't think that we can at least on a basic level, like we at least have to vote. You know what I mean? Like we at least have to care that much. And you may not be able to do it daily, but I talk to people about it and I said, it's always that one person in the neighborhood that knows what's going on. Mm-hmm. Check in with that person. I understand that not everyone has time to go to every meeting, all the time and every town hall, but it's just good to keep your ear on the ground. Sign up for your elected officials newsletter. So at least they're emailing you the information. You can follow them on Twitter, Facebook, they're on Instagram. There's so many ways that we can now connect to our elected officials that we should at least do that. It's so much easier.
So you talked about Flint and how people just slept what was going on and allowed the water to be contaminated because they just didn't get involved.
Well, I mean, it's not even that. What it was, basically was that the water source was switched because it was cheaper, right? It was maybe a few $1 million to switch the water source for, I think, maybe 14 months. And so when you look, and really what I want to get at is that these things happen when communities are not engaged. I notice, just around the country, the different things that happen. Once, and even in different boards, even in our city, I know that when particular communities, when they know that people are involved and someone is watching, they're more careful about the actions they take.
That
you know
is
what I mean? And so it's
so
like,
true.
they're real because they know if we do this, we're gonna hear from all of these people, or they're gonna know the 10 organizations they might hear from if they attack, and that there's going to be consequences to the action. But if we're not participating civically, there's no consequence.
You know, living in Lower Manhattan, that was the culture shock that I went through, because growing up in El Barrio and going to the community board because my father was a community leader, I saw how the issues there, because I attended one community board meeting and it really made an impact on me, because I didn't realize that people even had a say about the issues. But what the issues were what I describe as cake, whereas in the community board where I live in now focuses on icing. That's why we have a nice train station stop at Franklin Street, because the community board was involved with granting a variance to a particular corporation that wanted to build higher than the zoning laws allowed. We needed that train station cleaned up. We got that. We got schools. The downtown community center finally has its own space, because the community board, even though it's an advisory board, does have a say and does make an impact on businesses, as you mentioned. We can recommend whether the licensing agency, the liquor licensing agency, should grant a license. A lot of times they do listen to what the community board has to say. So it is not a magic bullet where if you're in a wealthier, affluent area, you're going to get more services just on the strength of having money. No, it has a lot to do with being involved in the community. And that's how you get what you want. So that said, there is something coming up that a lot of people, if they don't pay attention to in New York State, are going to wake up and say, well, I didn't know it impacted me, I didn't know it was important, and that is the state constitution. What is your position on that? Why is it important for New York State to pay attention to the other side, the reverse side of the ballot, and look there and make a decision?
Well, first thing I'm going to say about that is there are 3 proposals on the ballot. The first one is asking if we should have a constitutional convention. The second one is actually a referendum on whether or not elected officials that have been convicted of corruption, should they receive their pensions. And the third one, which I've seen these types come up often, is about some land, upstate, etc., and how it should be used. So that's the first thing. There are 3 proposals on the ballot. The Constitutional Convention proposal is really an interesting one. I've been to 1 or 2 forums. I shared information about all the forums that are going on. There's still a lot of forums taking place in these last 10, 11 days leading up to Election Day, November 7th. And it was one that was interesting, is that I listened to, because I actually don't usually tell people my position on something unless they specifically want to know my thoughts, and I'll give my reasoning behind it. But I am going to most likely vote no. I'm going to vote no.
Why is that?
I'm going to vote no more so because of a process and an access issue. Now, we just had an interesting conversation. This is actually the perfect segue into my answer. We just talked about how people are not always involved, and how different communities are more involved than others. And so if you look at the Constitutional Convention process, they talk about people running for delegate, going to convention, going to these meetings, having these conversations. Now there is, pay associated with it, but you gotta look at, so who is most likely going to be aware of the process to become a delegate, right? So I have process access issues. The other one, though, is that the Constitution of the state can be changed through the legislature. There's already a process to change our Constitution. And you also will hear, a lot of people talk about voting no on the Constitution because there are a lot of protections in the Constitution, particularly with unions, their salaries, pensions, all sorts of protections within the Constitution for the citizens of the state of New York. And those are actually very, very important, now in the current climate where a lot of protections are being pulled back and rescinded within the last couple of months. So having the protections on the state level are going to help buffer the protections that are, being peeled away on a national level. And so there's some concerns with some of the protections in the Constitution that people would like to keep.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now, you also have a Facebook page called the Educated Voter.
Educated Voter.
Talk about that.
And why. I basically post a lot of information. I post more as we're getting closer to the election cycle because I realize that that's when people, begin to pay attention. But I post a lot of resources that are freely available to people that they aren't aware of. So, for example, I post, information on how to find your poll site. A lot of people don't know that you can just go online and look that up. In addition to that, you can also look up your sample ballot. You talked about the Constitutional Convention when we just discussed it. And there's several forums going on around the state, so I add those events to my page so people can see, if they come to the page, they can take a look at those and kind of see what's going on throughout the state, and actually make the determination themselves. So it's really, I work very hard at being nonpartisan on my page because I want people to kind of look at the information and make the decision that's best for them. My goal is to have them participate in the process but be informed, which is why the term, is educated voter. I'm not the educated voter. I want everyone who I touch to be an educated voter and really to be sophisticated. And so it's, I'll post articles. I went to the debate. I'll post information on debates. I share a lot of information from NYC Vote, so, I have to plug them, where they're out here really trying to inform people. They have voter guides. There's so much information that we just don't realize is out there. And people, like I said, it's not the sexiest thing, so nobody's Googling it, but you could Google it as well. It's just right there at your fingertips. So I really share that, on a regular basis. I usually try, if I'm not posting regularly, I at least try to post something on Tuesdays, since that's the day when we vote. In this country, most of the time it's Tuesdays. Some other states have different days, but for the most part it's a Tuesday. So I'll try to post something Tuesday. But, really reminding people, to vote, especially now, it's like vote local. A lot of people, after the 2016 election, it was like, well, wait until 2018. And I was like, pause, everybody stop. We have elections in 2017. There's an election in a couple of days. So let's not skip, and again, that's part of the education. What had me started was talking to two young attorneys over Christmas dinner in 2014. And I had to get that they didn't understand. It's like you went to college, you went to high school, you went to elementary school, you went to law school, you passed the bar on the first try, but you don't know how your government works, which was crazy to me. And I realized, that day is what made me start it. But I said, you know what? I've talked to a lot of people I know that are very educated that don't get this process. And so when I talk to, I've had friends ask me, a girlfriend of mine, she works at a school, and she said to me, she sends me a message, can you help me get my congressperson to our graduation? They never come. And so I know the congressperson, and I was like, the first thing was that's so strange because I know this person likes kids. I've had this person at my events. And then I said, what's the date? What day do you do this? And she sent me the date. And I said, she's in session. So it wasn't that the person wasn't coming because they didn't want to come. It was that that person was in DC. So they it wasn't even registering that the person spends time locally, but then the person has to spend time in DC doing the work, of Congress. And so it was like I said, if you actually ever want this person to come, you're gonna have to change the date of your school's graduation, because if it's this day all the time, they will never be able to make it. And it was like but just having to explain those things to different people, just randomly, because they knew what I did professionally, so they knew I would know or be able to help them. But I've had a lot of those kinds of conversations, and it really came to a critical mass, that day, because it was something that happened politically in New York. I was upset about it. People were protesting, and a particular individual who was embroiled in controversy at the time was named for a higher position. And so I was incensed on Christmas Day 2014. And, to the people in my home, they were part of the protest, etc. And I, was really explaining to them, I said, the reason they can put this person up for another position, even though they're in the midst of all this craziness, is because they know where the votes are going to come from. You see, so when they know where their votes are going to come from, they can do these kinds of things.
Thank you so much for being here. And I encourage everybody, even if you're outside of New York, if you want to if you want to be able to conceptualize how government works, go to her Facebook page called Educated Voter, right?
Yes.
It's not The Educated Voter, it's Educated Voter.
It's actually Educated Voter NY. So Facebook.com/Educated Voter NY. And I also post links to how to find out national information. So it might be more New York focused, because that's what I know and that's where I am. But when I get national information, I share that too. And then on my website, I have links on how to find out national information. So, for example, one of the two things I want to mention is the voter ID laws for every state, and how each state treats those convicted of a felony. Because what people don't realize is voting is not, we don't have a national law that says everybody has the right to vote. So it's state by state. So each state gets to decide how they want voting to look. And so there's only 4 states where felons absolutely cannot vote ever again after they've been convicted. But the rest of the states, it's like if you finish, your parole, like in New York, for example, you can have your vote, you can be, is it re-enfranchised, I guess it would be, but you're not totally disenfranchised if you have a felony. And so there are websites that provide that information. There's another website, Turbo Vote, where you can sign up for election alerts. So you don't even have, if you don't know there's an election, you can actually sign up. They will email you, they will text you when you need to vote, the deadlines for absentee ballots, all absentee ballots, etc.
I'm going to place all the links below in the description box. Nikki's Facebook page, the information on getting the national alerts, the information on Turbo, what's it called?
Turbo Vote, that's how you get the alerts. And then criminal disenfranchisement.
Criminal disenfranchisement, so it'll be 3 links below. In the meantime, remember to like and subscribe and comment. The question this week is, how do you participate in your community? Until next week, goodbye.